Good morning. It's good to be with you all. This is the first of 6 lessons in 9th grade world history. My name is Coach Spivey. I am the 9th grade world history teacher at Viger High School. And I'd like to give a special shout out to my Wolfpack fam. Love and miss you guys for sure. Most of you know that we have decided to cover what they call 3 critical standards. And so our lesson today covers critical standard 1. It'll actually cover only part of that. We'll get the second half of this standard next week, same time. But I wanted to just walk through what this particular standard is and then tell you what we'll be looking at today. So the standard is explain causes and consequences of World War I, including imperialism, militarism, nationalism, and the alliance system. And it's okay if you don't know what these words mean. We'll talk about each one of them. But obviously our focus is on World War I. And so as we look at both the causes and consequences of World War I, today our focus will be on the causes. And it's easy to remember the causes of World War I. You can think of it as 3, 2, 1 are the causes of World War I. If you look on that, I'm sorry. All right, I apologize. Anyway, as my computer comes back up, the causes of World War I are 3, 2, 1. 3 isms, 2 alliances, and 1 event. 3 isms, anytime you hear the suffix ism at the end of the word, that's always going to refer to a belief system, a philosophy. So think about one that you know, like, for instance, racism. You got that suffix ism at the end. Racism would be the belief, so we got a belief system that one race is superior to another. So as we look at the 3 isms, and as the computer comes back up, we'll be able to see it. There's 3 of them. The first is imperialism. The second is nationalism. And the third is militarism. So think about what those words might mean. Okay. Coming back. Apologize, technical difficulties. So we got the causes, 3 isms, 2 alliances. These are bonds and between countries where they get on the same side, and then 1 event. We'll look at these 2 next time, but our focus today will be on these 3 isms. So let's look at the first one. Anytime you have the word ism again, we're talking about a belief system. These are the 3 isms that were the causes of World War I. And if I just took the suffix off and you looked at the first part of the word, I bet you could figure out what they would mean. For instance, let's just take nationalism. If I took ism off, you see the word what? National, right? Or nation. Militarism. Take off ism. You think military, right? Okay, so let's look at imperialism first. We need to know as we look at imperialism, maybe we want to ask these questions right here. What is it? Obviously, we need to know what it is. Why imperialism? We want to look at where it occurred, when it occurred, who was responsible, who did it involve, and then how did this take place. So let's start obviously with what? We need to know what imperialism is. So here's a quick definition. Imperialism. Imperialism is control by a strong nation over a weaker nation. Now that word control that's kind of like a rated G, PG version of the word. If I think of one nation controlling, maybe another word that would be a better description, maybe dominate or take over or even conquer. And so if I'm throwing this word control by a strong nation over a weaker nation, I bet you could picture in your mind what that would actually entail, what it would look like, what would need to happen for one nation to come in and take over or control another one. And oftentimes it wasn't very pretty, and it wasn't. But this is what imperialism is. Let's look at why. Why was it that in this case European countries wanted to come in and conquer other ones? Why? The first reason why these European countries wanted to engage imperialism, money. And obviously money is a big motivating factor. It's a motivating factor for a lot of things. In this case, it was a motivating factor for imperialism. Probably one of the last things you covered last quarter in your world history class was industrialization, or the Industrial Revolution. Industrialization is that movement of making things by hand to now making stuff by machine. In order for them to make things, you needed raw materials, right? You needed raw materials, the stuff to make it, but you also needed new markets or places to sell it, people to buy your stuff that you made. So what better way for me to make money than for me to go conquer another country, take their raw materials, stuff I need to make the products, and then sell it back to them. So money was a huge motivating factor. The second reason why European countries engaged imperialism is this idea of national pride. So if my country's out there taking over, conquering other countries, I'm like, yeah, man, we're all right, man. My nation's better than your nation. This is, we're awesome. Think about your favorite football team. If your football team is losing, man, you keep your lips sealed. Not going to be a lot of pride in your team. But if your team's winning, hey, I'm pulling for so-and-so. That's my favorite team. And there's a lot of pride with that. Same thing with the country. When they're in there taking over, conquering other places, it created a sense of national pride. So that's another reason why. A third reason why is one that's not so good, and that is racism. You know what racism is. There's ism, the belief that one race is superior to another. You may not know this second word, though, social Darwinism. There was a scientist, Charles Darwin, and you've probably heard of him in your science class, came up with this theory of evolution, right? And part of that theory of evolution was this idea of survival of the fittest, that one species who is more fit to survive based on whatever traits that they had, they were bigger, faster, whatever, would live, and the ones that did not have those traits would die off. And that was just science. It was just life. That's the way it works. Survival of the fittest. And now if I took that same scientific theory and applied it to society, well, now you got this idea of social Darwinism, that the society who is bigger and badder and has a better military, stronger, whatever it is, would conquer these weaker nations. And that's just the way it is. Sorry, that's life. Well, I mean, I know that's kind of a twisted view of the world, but this was a motivating factor. In fact, I put a quote on here by a British guy named Cecil Rhodes, who actually operated one of the largest diamond mines in South Africa. And I want to just read it to you, and I want you to just let this land and hear the racism, hear the twisted view of different cultures and societies that this man presented. He said, "I contend that we, Britons, are the first race in the world, and the more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. It is our duty to seize every opportunity of acquiring more territory, and we should keep this one idea steadily before our eyes, that more territory simply means more of the Anglo-Saxon race, more of the best, the most human, most honorable race the world possesses." And that's in 1877. Man, that's just full of racism and social Darwinism. A clear motivating factor, the feeling that they could come in and conquer another place because they were superior in some way. The fourth and final reason of why, maybe one that comes across as more noble, is there were people that wanted to come in and spread Christianity, spread some of these European religions, ways of thinking to people groups that had not heard of Christianity before. But these were four of the main reasons why imperialism took place. So we know what it is, we know why it is. Let's go back and look at where. So where did imperialism take place? So I'm going to pull up a map here. I'm not sure if you can see it. They may be able to pull it up where you can see just the map. The place in the world that we're going to focus on for the remainder of this lesson is Africa, but two of the places that imperialism really took place was obviously Africa, which we'll focus on, but also some in Southeast Asia. And this imperialism really had long-lasting consequences. Even now in 2020, we still see lingering effects of imperialism. So this is where imperialism took place. And by the way, it was mostly these European countries that engaged in the imperialism. So we know where. Let's look at when. And I'm not a huge stickler for dates, but as we move up to how imperialism was a cause of World War I think this map will be able to tell you, and you may want to focus on just the map. The map on the left is a map of Africa in 1878. All right, well, let's fast forward, and well, anywhere that you see this brown area in the middle, these are areas that have not been occupied by European countries. You see just a few along the edge, like along the coastline here, some little dots along the edge, but the overwhelming majority of Africa had not been colonized. But let's fast forward about 30 years to 1913. So this map on the right is 1913. So in just 30 short years, Africa went from hardly any colonization to now almost the entire continent being occupied by European countries. That's a lot that happened in that 30-year span. And you'll see as these European countries came in and competed with one another over valuable lands in Africa, why that would eventually lead to World War I. So this is when. So we're talking about from 1878 right up until the brink of World War I in 1913. Now imperialism still takes place today in some forms, but for our history's sake, right now we're focusing on just this area. So this is when. Now let's look at who engaged in imperialism. So I'll pull up the map, and on the map we have that same map of these European countries that have colonized. Now you may not be able to see it, But on this particular map, there's a key that shows what European countries are there. So I'm going to pull that key out so you can see it a little bit better. And these are the different countries that engaged in imperialism in Africa. We got the Belgians. If I slide it, let me slide it over to the side. So, for instance, the Belgians, this purple, we see them right there in the middle. The French, the light purple, all of this area. The British, this orange area right in here and some down here. You get the picture. All of these countries, the Italians, Portuguese, Spanish, Germans, all engaged in imperialism. So let's look at how, real quick, how. And this is important. So if we're talking about one country conquering another country, we need to know how that took place. First, they have better technology. This is a picture of the Maxim gun, one of the first machine guns to be produced. And obviously, if I take this machine gun and I'm fighting guys with spears, I mean, you know this isn't going to end very well for a lot of those African tribes. Technology too, this was a big one, an invention of a drug called the quinine. One of the reasons that the African continent could not be colonized prior to this is because of the malaria disease that killed off a lot of Europeans who would try to come into the continent of Africa. Well, this quinine drug was a treatment for malaria which allowed Europeans to push into the continent. And then finally, the third piece of technology is this little thing right here called the steam engine. When I take this steam engine and I put it on a boat, you get a steamboat. If I put it on this, you call it a train. And that allowed the Europeans to push further into the interior of Africa. There were also some internal factors within Africa that led to imperialism. There were tons, you may not could have seen it on the map that I showed earlier, but there were many languages and cultures. See, Africa isn't just one thing, right? There's hundreds and hundreds of different languages, hundreds of different tribes and different cultures. And so for them to be able to communicate to oppose these European forces was next to impossible. And a lot of times these tribes would have wars and competition with each other for land and resources. And obviously if I'm fighting with other people, I can't join forces with them to oppose these imperialist forces. The last thing I wanted to mention about how these European countries got together in what was called the Berlin Conference. At the Berlin Conference, 14 European nations met to decide how Africa would be divided. The problem was no African nation was there to put their input in on it. The two things that they walked away with was all you got to do is notify the other European nations of your claim and show the ability to control it. They wanted to carve up Africa without really having to fight amongst themselves. This is a cool political cartoon which depicts that. They're just carving up Africa like a piece of pie and everybody gets their slice. So this is one of the factors. And as these European countries began to compete with one another over these lands, it obviously caused a lot of tensions, which would end up leading to World War I. The second ism is nationalism. And nationalism is just a belief, nationalism is the belief that people should be loyal to their nation. So a pride in, a devotion to, a loyalty to one's nation. So if that's my loyalty, I need to know what a nation is. So what is a nation? A nation, oftentimes people think of a nation as a country. A nation is actually the people. So I want you to think nation, people. A people that is bound by certain things. In this case, nationalism is a group of people that are bound by certain things, like a common culture, way of doing things. That might be music, food, dress, behavior, whatever. Common history. They share common experiences that bind them together. Common language, common territory or land, common nationality, even sometimes a religion. Now, a nation doesn't have to be all of these things, but it'll encompass these things that bind people together. Now, why would that be an issue and a cause for World War I? Well, check this out. If a nation is the people, and a nation does not equal country necessarily, it may, but it doesn't have to. Let me give you an example of 3 different countries. So country 1 has 3 nations in it. Do you think that that would be a problem? If you got 3 different nations in the same country? Well, certainly. They probably would want to split off and create their own. Or country number 2, the country is the political boundaries, but now you got a nation that's actually part in one country and part in another, and now that could create a problem. And then every once in a while you'll have, yes, a nation that is a country, and for most nations or people groups, this is their ideal. So as these different groups begin to compete with one another, and this pride in your nation began to develop, obviously it created some tension, conflict, competition. My nation's better than your nation. Oh yeah? Well, what happens when you get this competition and then the third ism happens, which is militarism, the buildup of a military. It's a policy of glorifying military power and keeping an army prepared for war. So now you got people that might not get along, there's a lot of tension, competing with one another, and now I see them building up their military. What's that going to make me do? Well, I need to build up my military. They see me building up my military, so they're going to make theirs a little bit bigger and stronger. So now you get these strong European forces with large militaries, and it's just a recipe for, well, World War I. So let me just come back here and mention the 3 isms that were the cause of World War I. The first was imperialism, the building up of an empire, countries going in and taking over, controlling, dominate, conquering other weaker nations. And as these European countries did it, they began to compete with one another over these spots. And this pride in one nation, my nation's better than your nation, and that whole idea and that bond between people became very, very strong. And this created tension and competition, and then when you build up militaries, well, it's a recipe for World War I. When we come back next week, I'll mention quickly the alliances where, in this case, if you're building up your military, I want to try to get some people on my side, so if we end up fighting, I got somebody to back me up, and then they see me getting my friends on my side, and so they're going to go and they're going to get their people on their side, and now we got 2 large groups, and all it took was one event to set it off. So we'll mention these 2 alliances and the event that set it all off next week, and we'll talk about as quickly as we can what happened during World War I and some of the consequences after World War I. But once again, 3, 2, 1 are the causes of World War I. It was great to be with y'all. I hope it was helpful, and look forward to seeing y'all next week.